Want to start producing your music faster? Well, today I'm going to teach you just how to do that by creating the perfect template. Stay tuned. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another producing tip tutorial. My name is Dylan Pines, and today we're going to be talking about creating the perfect template for writing music, or for recording music, or for mixing music. I think templates get kind of a weird rap in the industry. Some people think that they can be kind of limiting. Some people think that they can be unnecessary. Some people don't want to put the work into creating them. Ultimately, I can tell you one of the best things I've ever done for speeding up my workflow is focusing in on creating a stellar template. I mean, seriously, I've been able to save maybe an hour of prep work for each mix that I do simply because I've created just the best template that I could. And honestly, over the course of creating and finishing a song, this thing can save you hours. It's going to help to keep you organized. It's going to help make things easier to find. And ultimately, it keeps you from having to do repetitive tasks that break your flow. Because when you're writing, when you're recording, when you're mixing, the most important thing you can do is to be focusing in on the decisions that matter, not just doing the tasks that have to be done that take no brain power at all. Ultimately, it just gets the DAW out of the way. For writing, it gets the DAW out of the way of your creativity. For recording, it gets the DAW out of the way of your performance. For editing, for example, it gets the DAW out of the way of your speed. And for mixing, it gets the DAW out of the way of your decision making. I'm real passionate about creating great templates, so I just want to dive straight in. But before we do that, I do want to give a quick disclaimer. This video is not going to be going over how to make a template. Every single DAW is different. Every single DAW has a different template creation process. This is going to be going over what to include in those templates. You know, for your DAW, just do a quick Google search on how to make a template in insert DAW name here, and you'll be fine. But watch this video first so that you don't miss out on what to fill that template with. So let's get started. Here's the first important note. I'd recommend having 3 separate templates. I actually just had one template for a very long time, and I recently switched to having 3 different templates, one for songwriting, one for recording, and one for editing and mixing. Now, the reason I switched is because I found that using one standard template for all 3 of these different phases, I was trying to make that template be everything for every situation, and it honestly just bogged the template down. It was just too big, too much stuff was happening. So I split them up, and it's made a lot of difference. And we're going to talk about what's different between each template in a bit. But first off, I want to start with what's the same. So here's what you're going to want to include in all 3 templates that you create. So first off, you want to put in audio tracks for all of the common instruments that you use. So for me, I usually use an acoustic drum set, an acoustic bass, electric guitars, acoustic guitars, pianos. I've got all of my synth stuff down here, my vocals, my harmonies, my background vocals. I've made sure to create all of these tracks ahead of time so that I don't have to create them in the moment. They're already set up. It's perfect. So the next thing that you're going to want to make sure that you do is that you are color coding all of these tracks. So no matter what, in all of my templates, drums are red, bass is orange, electric guitar is yellow. It's the same across all 3. Now that's great because visually I don't have to search for the written word to figure out, okay, where's my bass? Where's my drums? Where's my acoustic guitar 3? I'm going to be able to just say okay, cool. Where's red? Red's here. Great. Because not only will these sides be colored, but so will the regions. All the regions will be red. All the regions will be orange. These regions will be green. So on and so forth. Makes it very, very easy to find stuff. So the next thing that I would put in all of your different templates is optional section markers. So up here, I just have all these markers. They're all colored differently, so I can pick them out really easily. And what I would do is, based on the song I was working on, is I would change these to say intro, verse 1, chorus 1, and so on and so forth. And then I would just move them around so that I was getting the right size of each section. And the great part about this is that, for one, I didn't have to create these. They're all already there. And for 2, I didn't have to color them. Coloring takes time. Being able to do it ahead of time makes it so much easier. So the next thing that I would put in every template you have is some sort of folder system. Now, every DAW does this differently. For Logic Pro, it's called track stacks. So you can see, let's actually go to my electric guitars, for example. I actually have folders and subfolders. So you can see these are my actual tracks that I would record a region on. So this is where my music would be coming from. And then I've got a little subfolder for this one part. So for example, if I had like 2 doubles of the first electric guitar part, that would go in this folder. And then for electric guitar 2, that would go in this folder, and so on. The nice part about this is that there are key commands for all DAWs to open and close all folders. And then not only that, but I have all these subfolders inside one main folder. So just like that, I went from all of this real estate to just one single track. It's extremely helpful for whenever you're trying to focus in on working on one thing. So like if I'm just wanting to work on the acoustic guitar, I could just select everything, minimize it, and then open up the acoustic guitar and just work on that, rather than having all this stuff open at the same time. And this would be even more stressful, of course, if there were regions everywhere. You know, in this particular template, there's nothing actually going on here, so it's not really quite so stressful, but I think you can imagine what I'm talking about. Next thing I would include on all of your different templates, if your DAW has this option, is different track icons. This is just another visual way to find what you're looking for outside of just coloring. So for example, on drums, you can see each of my icons matches up to the drum. So I've got a little kick icon. I've got some snare icons for the snares. I've got some cymbal icons for the overheads. You know, for my electric guitars, you can see I actually have a different electric guitar for each part. It's just another visual way to tell them all apart when you're looking for something specific. Now, the next thing I would do is I would start your session at 0 bars. And here's what I mean by that. Most DAWs have the ability to do this in some way. In Logic, you're going to go over here. You see this little triangle? If I pull this back, I actually can add extra bars to the beginning of a session. Now, you might wonder why that's really necessary. I like to set it at 0 bars, but still have my song start at 1. And the reason for that is a lot of songs start with pickup notes. You know, rather than starting just right on the 1, it might start right before the 1. There might just be a few notes coming in, or maybe a drum fill or something like that. And if I'm writing, for example, I don't really want to hinder myself, keep myself from putting in any pickup notes simply because there's not space and I'm wanting to keep it organized. And if I'm mixing, I don't really want to put the beginning of each audio file right up here at the beginning of the session, because that's going to mess with my normal track count. If I know that most sections are 8 bars, well, then I know that the next section is going to start at bar 9. But if I start the whole song 1 bar off because of some pickup notes, well, that means that this little organization system I've created in my head is off. So I'm going to want to add in that extra little bar so I can keep these numbers as accurate as possible. And finally, I'm going to want to put in notes on my process. Now, this is something I honestly have not seen in many templates. This isn't really a thing that gets talked about in other YouTube videos. This is a thing that I do for myself, and it has made so much difference. Now, I don't actually have it in this particular template just because this is an example that I made for this video. But in Logic, there's a little notes thing right here, and you can type in notes. You can put notes on whatever you want to be in here. And the great part about it is that you can basically think about what your workflow is, what your process is for every single one of these phases, for writing, for recording, for editing, for mixing. And you can type in step by step what that process is. And then you can refer to it while you're in the middle of the process. Now, that might seem unnecessary, but it is fantastic to be able to check stuff off as you go, because you're going to be able to just be in flow. You're not going to have to worry about, moving back and forth between different steps. You can just be like, okay, cool. I am on the compression step. I'm compressing the mix. Once I'm done with my compression, then I can cross it out and I can move on to the next step. Now, if your DAW doesn't have a notepad inside it, there is actually a plugin that does the exact same thing. It's a plugin by Melda Production, and it's actually called M Notepad. It's a free plugin, and it does the exact same thing. It doesn't do any processing. It just types in notes. Now, this is great because you can type in notes about the process of the mix, or you can type in notes about maybe how you want to process this particular instrument. It just makes it easier to keep your workflow straight. So that's everything that you should be putting in all of your templates. Different tracks, different track colorings, different section options, some notes, stuff like that. That is going to be the bread and butter of all of your templates. But now that that's done, let's go and look at what you should be adding to each template individually. So let's start with your songwriting template. So I've actually gone and opened up my template right here, and you can see it looks very similar to that example template that we just had. And again, it's because a lot of the basics apply across all three of these templates. But you can also see a few extra things that I've thrown on top. So for example, you can see that I got rid of a lot of my drum tracks, and the only thing that's left here are software drums. Like if I open this up, you can see that I basically have the ability to create the drums in the session without having to go to a studio, write the drums, and record the drums. You can see I've got a few of these. Like I've got one for bass guitar. I have one for acoustic guitar as well. I have one for piano. And obviously, I have my synthesizers. Now, not all of these are things that I do actually create using MIDI. Like I have a bass guitar, I have an acoustic guitar. There are things that I will regularly record while I'm writing. But sometimes I have an idea, maybe I'm not writing a song that's really based on that instrument, and I don't want to go set up a microphone, or I don't want to plug in DI, I just don't want to take the time. Now it's here. And the great part about using MIDI as well for writing is that if I need to go in and change a note, shorten a note, change up the rhythm, I can do it immediately. It makes it very, very easy during your writing session. Plus, it's here. I don't have to create it. If I have the idea, all I've got to do, come over here, bring up my keyboard or the keyboard that I have in the studio, and just hit record. And I can start doing whatever I need to. And then once it comes time to record, then I can actually go in and record a real bass. Now, for people who are more based on like samples and synths and stuff, this is a great time to bring up a lot of your favorite patches, a lot of your favorite synths. I've seen people create songwriting templates where it's just like, okay, here's a folder of all of my favorite synth pads, and here's a folder of all of my favorite synth leads, and here's a folder of all of my favorite like different drum patches and stuff like that, my different drum samples. It just makes it easier to write on the fly, and then you can tweak sounds later. Because ultimately for me, I care deeply, deeply about the color of a track, but ultimately the sign of a good producer, the sign of a good songwriter is caring more about the notes first and then caring about the color of those notes. I care more about just like getting everything down than I care about making sure the tone of everything is absolutely perfect. So if you can write the song and then tweak the instruments, you are in the sweet spot. So the next thing that I have in my songwriting template is guitar amp sims. Now I do a lot of songwriting with my electric guitar. Not everyone does that, of course, but that's just my instrument of choice. So you can see all of my different guitar tracks all have amp sims. And the reason for this is that I don't really want to take the time to set up microphones to actually record my guitar amp. I'm going to care more about that during the recording phase, not so much during the writing phase. During the writing phase, all I want to do is plug direct in and write. Again, this goes right back to what I was talking about a second ago. I don't really want to care about my tones. I just want to care about the notes. But the great thing about this is that I actually do have a custom preset set up. It's something that sounds great, with my pedal board and my guitars, something that I have created custom myself so that regardless of what I'm actually writing, I know it's going to sound at least pretty good. Now, again, this is the case for any sort of simulations or patches, anything that you're going to want to put in your writing template. Make sure that it's custom. Make sure that you've gone in, you've tweaked the sound, it sounds good to your ears so that as you're writing, you're not going to be playing something and just be sitting there like, oh God, these notes are good, but I just hate how this sounds. You don't really want that. So moving on, the next thing you're going to want to put in your songwriting template is a send folder with a few different aux tracks already set up. And this is something that you might not really be aware of as a possibility. So I actually, down here, you can see, I have a folder that I've created, same as all of these folders, it's the exact same thing, with all of my different sends already created. You know, in Logic, there's always the problem whenever you create a send. Ultimately, it always ends up, you know, at the far end of the mixer. You have no control over where it goes. So if I wanted to do any kind of automation on it, it just becomes very, very difficult. But the nice thing about doing it this way is A, I can set it up to where there's a folder, so I can minimize it whenever I don't need the sends. And B, I can actually hide it. You can see each of these has a little H next to it. If I hit H on my keyboard, it goes away. So if I don't need it, it can be gone. And for me, that's all I care about. I want it there if I need it. I don't want it there if I don't. So if I was, for example, working on an electric guitar and maybe I wanted a spring reverb on that guitar, I could go to a bus and I have all of my sends set up over here, and I could just go and select send one. I could put a reverb on it real quick. It doesn't matter what that's a delay, but you know what I mean. And then I would just name this EG verb. And great, it's there. I've got that turned up and we're done. That's all I needed to do. I didn't have to go through the process of creating it. It's already there. Plus, it's already organized. I know exactly where it is. And if for whatever reason I wanted to bring it up with my guitars so that I could tweak it next to my guitar tracks, I can. There it is right there. Nice and easy. So the next thing you should set up for your songwriting template is a basic room reverb send on all of your channels. So let's check out my mixer. Now you can see I have bus 33 set up on every single one of my instrument buses. Now the reason for that is that all of these are just getting sent to right here, a room reverb. For me personally, whenever I'm doing songwriting, a lot of times I still want, even if I'm not really caring about the color right now, I still want everything to feel like it's being performed in one room. And it becomes a lot easier when that room is already set up. I've already tweaked it. And all I have to do to get it to sort of glue in with the rest of the song is just turn it up. And that's it. Super, super simple. I don't have to go through the trouble of creating an extra reverb, placing it on every single track. It's already done. It's in the template. All I got to do is write what I want to write and then turn it up. So that's pretty much it for our songwriting template. Most of the extra additions just deal with creation, getting the notes right as fast as we can. Now let's move on to our recording template. So the recording template is more about getting rid of stuff than it is about adding new stuff. You can see this is the closest that I have to that basic template that I showed you at the beginning of the video. I took out all of my different electronic instruments and I just left in audio tracks. Now, if you work only in electronic music and all of your music is just synths and samples and stuff, then this template might not really be necessary. You might do most of that work during your writing session. So you're not going to have to come in and re-record, re-perform all of those parts because you've already done it. For you, it's going to be more getting the color right, which you can do in that session or you can do in a new session if you'd like. But if you're primarily working with acoustic instruments, then this is going to be the template for you. Because you can see I've got now all of my acoustic drum tracks up here. I've got my acoustic bass tracks up here. I've got now my acoustic piano tracks up here. Most of the MIDI stuff is gone. Especially because usually if I want to keep certain MIDI tracks actually in my song, then I usually will convert them to an audio track for mixing. I don't actually want them to be there for the recording phase unless I'm wanting to re-perform them during the recording phase. Like for example, if I don't have access to maybe a grand piano, so I just want to use a MIDI grand piano, well, that's okay. In fact, that's something that I have quite a bit. You can see I've got 2 audio tracks to record grand piano, but I still do have my MIDI grand piano here just in case I want to re-record the part that I wrote during the writing session. Here's the most important thing that I would say for this template. And it's that if you look at all of my tracks, the inputs are all correct. I primarily am going to be recording out of input 1 just for my particular setup. And one thing I've found whenever I wasn't working with templates is that a lot of times the inputs would be just totally random. Input 1, input 2, no input. Sometimes the input would be a bus for some reason. And I'd start recording myself and I'd be playing and I'd be performing. It would sound good. And then I'd look up and see that no recording was actually happening. So by making sure that all of these inputs are correct, you're just going to be keeping yourself from heartbreak when the actual recording starts. Now, there are a few optional things that you can have in your template. I don't actually have them, but that's just because I don't need them. If you feel the need to set up a headphone mix, just for your specific setup, if maybe you need one or your performers need different headphone mixes, you can do that in the template. You can create your different sends to be able to actually have a separate mix for the headphones. Or if you like recording with effects, you can add that as well. I don't do that because I find that it messes too much with the latency of the recording, but you can add those sends to these tracks as well. To do that, it's the same process as you did with the songwriting template. You're just going to create the sends ahead of time, create the effects ahead of time, add them to the different channels, and then they are there when you need them during your recordings. That's pretty much it. The recording template is the most simple out of all the templates we have. So now we're going to be moving on to the most important template and the most complicated template, the mixing template. So here's my mixing template. And you can see it looks fairly similar to what we've been working on. But as I scroll down, you're going to start to see a lot more stuff hidden. There's a lot more stuff going on in the background of this template. You can also see the notes that I've created for this particular template. I haven't actually had that up for the last two templates, but this is what I'm talking about. I have just sort of like my different sub phases of the phase. I've got like my steps for editing, for balancing, for mixing. All that stuff is here so that I can refer to it during the session if I need it. So let's kick off the mixing template by talking about routing. There's a lot of routing differences that I've added into this template that aren't in the other templates. For example, every single part has a bus. So you can see basically I have like my electric guitar parts, and both of them are running into bus 11. And the input of this folder is also bus 11. Each of these instruments already has their own bus. You can see bus 15, bus 14, bus 10. Because I've done this ahead of time in my template, I don't have to take the valuable time that I would usually have to take at the beginning of a mix to actually group all these tracks together into buses so that I can process them together. Now you can see I've also done this with my drums. I actually have two buses with the drums. I've got buses for each of my individual drums, and I have a bus for my drum set. Now, this is something that you would use if you were using both samples or if you were using actual acoustic instruments. You'd want to bus all of your kick samples together and then run all of your drum samples into a single bus so you can do a little bit of bus compression, like a little bit of that glue compression. But because I've done this ahead of time, it's made it a lot faster. Moving on from there, you can see that I no longer have the outputs of my tracks as just stereo output. You see how now like this is going to bus 2, this is going to bus 1. This is because I've actually created some sub mixes that I use for my own personal mixing. So let me bring up my mixer. So all the way over here, we'll go over all this stuff in a bit. I've got some routing stuff created for myself. So you can see I have 3 main aux tracks and then one just for the room reverb because I don't like that running through any of these sub mixes. I've got one for my rhythm section, one for the rest of my instruments, and one for the melody. And the melody could be the vocals, it could be a guitar part, it could be a synth part. The only thing I want running through here is the melody and any like harmonies or layers that are adding on to that melody. And I do some different processing for all of these. And this video is not going to be going over what that processing is. I mean, you can kind of do your own research on submix processing. But the fact is that I have all of these already created, and then all of them are running into bus 67, which you can see right here, is my mix bus. I'm calling it mix out. Honestly, I could just say mix bus, same thing. So this is where I would do all of my mix bus processing, any of my mix bus compression, mix bus EQ, any of my mix bus saturation. That is going to be the channel that I'm doing it on. So everything is flowing into this, and then this is flowing into my stereo output. Now, the reason I have created my own mix bus channel instead of using the stereo output is just because I want my mix and my mix references to be running through different outputs. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So the next routing thing that I have already done is basically I already have all of my sends and bus naming already set up. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So if I was to go over here and I wanted to create a send, right? So let me go to my bus. So first of all, my bus list for the instruments is very, very well organized. I've got my my submixes here at the top. Then I've got my drums. Then I've got my bass. Then I've got all my electric guitars, my acoustic guitars, my pianos. You can see this runs in the exact same order that my actual session runs. See, I have drums and then bass, then electric guitar, then acoustic guitar, and so on. But that's not actually what we're talking about right now. We're talking about sends. So for sends, I have them all over here. And you can see I have them very, very organized. I've got a little group of reverb sends that I can use for really whatever I want during the mix. I've got a group of delay sends that I can use for whatever I want, a group of compression sends, saturation sends, modulation sends. So basically, like if I wanted to create a send because I wanted to put, a plate reverb on the vocal, or a big delay on the guitars, or some parallel compression for the drums, I already have all of this set up. So if I'm looking for where that particular send is, I know exactly like, oh, it's reverb, it's at the top, or oh, it's compression, it's in the middle. And not only that, but I have all the tracks created, just like I did on the songwriting template. But this time I have them organized into their own individual folders. So you can see I've got my reverb sends, and they're all right here. And I've got my delay sends, and they're all right here. And I've got my compression sends, and what I'm calling my miscellaneous sends, that's my saturation and my modulation and a few extra little things. And because they're already made, I can do automation to them. It's super easy. I can move them around if I need to. I can rename them to drum saturation. It doesn't matter. I can do all that stuff, and it's already done. It's already there. It's already got the routing correct on it. It's already got the sends on it that I have created for my reverb, basically for the same way that I did on my songwriting template. It's all already there. I don't have to create it. And then when I'm not worrying about it, it's all hidden. So I've just got to hit the H on my keyboard or the H up here or however your DAW does it, and it's gone. It's still being processed, but it's not there. Now look at this. I can literally go from this, which is just so organized, all the way to this, which is actually all of the tracks in this session. Look, there's 146 tracks in here, 146 tracks. And I'm able to take it down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tracks. 146 to 8 is insane. And you're going to be able to do that with a good template. So let's keep on rolling on what's different about the mixing template. And I actually have a few things that I have created specifically for editing. So the most important thing that I've created is I actually have down here a little edit folder, you can see. Now, right now, I only have a placeholder in here. But what I end up doing is I do all of my edits. I do my vocal tuning, I do my drum pocketing, I do my cleaning, my rhythm editing, stuff like that. And then I will bounce those tracks in place. I'll make sure that I'm starting the mix with fresh tracks. They're already edited. They're not super chopped up and crossfaded. I'm not dealing with potentially losing what I did with Melodyne because it glitched out or something. They're all done. And then whenever I am done with the edits, I just will drag those tracks. So for example, let's say this was an edited track. All I would do is grab that track and move it into my edit folder. Hide it, turn it off, take it away, and it's done. What that means is I didn't have to delete any of my edits. So if I messed up, if something happened, I can go back, I can fix it, I can re-bounce it and put it back into my mix. So not only do I not have to delete it, but I don't have to leave it in the mix, because a lot of people feel that they have to do one or the other. Like they either have to leave it there forever so that it makes the mix really, really cluttered, or I have to delete it completely, which means if something goes wrong, I don't have a backup. This is the best of both worlds. It's not making your session any slower, especially if you bypass all the plugins and you actually turn the track off. It's not taking up any of your screen real estate because it's hidden, it's in its own folder. Nice and simple and easy. Now, the other thing that I have preset up is I have my group naming set up. And this is specifically for editing tracks that have multiple microphones during recording. Let me go to my mixer. So for example, you never want to do any kind of drum pocketing if you don't have all of your different tracks grouped together. And what that means is basically if you do an edit to one track, it does that edit to all of them. So for groups in Logic, obviously that's just this little gray box down here. Now, usually it would just say group one, name. It wouldn't have anything down here. But I've already created all of these groups ahead of time. So I know that group one is drums. I know that group two is bass. I know that group three is electric guitar one. You can see this is organized in the exact same way that I have my tracks organized, just like my sends, just like my buses. So I would just select group one. Now all of my drums are grouped together, and I feel a lot more confident about doing my drum pocketing, about doing my rhythm editing. And if I just want to turn those off for whatever reason, there's a keystroke to do it in every DAW. For Logic, it is Shift G. And now it's gone. Super easy, super simple. So let's move on from the editing and let's just move into the mixing. There's a few extra bells and whistles that I have added to this template to make the mix go as smoothly as possible. So first of all, if we go down here, down to my hidden tracks, you can see I have a little folder for my references. Now, if you don't use mix references, you absolutely should. We've got a video on that on the channel that is really, really great, just teaching you what they are, how to use them, why they help your mixes so much. But I've got a folder already created for them. So A, I don't have to make that. B, it's hidden so I can get it out of the way when I don't need it. But also you can see it's being routed to the stereo output. Now, this was the reason I made my mix bus originally. My mix bus going to the stereo output and my references are going to the stereo output. The reason I wanted to create this in my template was because I didn't want my reference tracks to be processed by any of the processing that I have on my mix bus. I want them to go into the actual stereo output clean. I didn't want any sort of coloration on them so that I can actually hear what they sound like in comparison to my mix. So whenever I'm done with them, all I've got to do is minimize them, hit hide, and they go away. So the next thing that I did is I actually created channel strip templates for common strips and effects. So for example, for kick, if I went up here to my channel strip settings and my user channel strip settings, you can see I've got it all super organized. So for drums, let's go to my kick. And these are common plugins that I use whenever I'm mixing my kick. Now, I don't always use all of them, but these are the ones that I use the most, and they're already here. I don't have to go in and find them. I just have to turn them on and start doing some tweaking. Super simple. So I would literally start out the mix and basically just go to each of my drums and add these to each bus. And I would do that to the rest of my instruments as well. So I have that for my different channel strip settings, but I also have that for my individual sends as well. So for example, let's say I wanted a delay. I can now go over to my delay sends. I just selected bus 40, which is delay number 1. Now go up to setting, user channel strip settings. You can see I've got a folder labeled delay, and I've got all of these different delays that I love using that just sound really great to my ears. Let's say I put that on the drum set, I have a cool drum set delay that I already have set up. That's already done. All I would have to go in, maybe go and do some tweaks if I felt the need to, and then just grab it, take it down, and mix it in a little bit till my ears are satisfied. It's so easy. Now, the two final things that I have in this template, one, you can see, let me go over here, all of my audio tracks have no input. And that's because I'm not going to be doing any more recording. And I don't want to accidentally have an audio track that maybe has a bus as an input, which could cause some feedback. Or maybe I accidentally hit record and I start to record over a track because maybe I have a microphone set up for whatever reason, maybe because I was working on another song right before I started my mix. I don't want that to happen. So I make sure that all of these have no input, but that their outputs are set correctly. And then finally, on my stereo output, you can see I have a lot of different metering. I've just got stuff that I'm going to want to have while I'm listening to the mix. I've got my VU meter, I've got my loudness meter if I want it, I've got Dynameter, which is a great plugin that I use to just see how dynamic my mix is. I mix through SonarWorks, so this is something that I'll use just to get a cleaner mix. I'll use something like Isolate if I just want to listen to like the low frequencies or the mid frequencies. This is a free plugin, by the way. This is great for just if you're wanting to hone in on one particular part of the frequency spectrum. All this stuff is already up here, so I don't have to create it if I need it. And that's it. That's the end of the mixing template. Now, obviously, this one is the most complicated out of all of them, but these are all things that you would do during the actual mixing session. You would create all of these things. So that's how you use templates. It's really as simple as that. But I will say before we go, this is just one small piece of the puzzle when you're trying to get great songs, when you're trying to get great recordings, great mixes, that are actually ready for the public. You can get this perfect and you can still end up with an amateur sound if you're making mistakes in the actual mix. So to fix that problem, Rob Mazes, the founder of Musician on a Mission, the face you've seen on half the videos on this channel, he put together a free workshop where he shares the 7 steps to making radio-ready music at home. He's actually created a new approach to home recording and mixing that will help you do all this stuff much, much faster, even if you have all of these templates created. And it hasn't just worked for him. Over 36,000 people, crazy number, 36,000 people have already been through this workshop and have seen results in their music in just a few days. So that said, now it's your turn. If you want to learn the exact 7 steps that will take your mixes to a professional standard in under a year, and you want to keep from wasting precious time, which I assume you do because you watched the very end of this video, well, then go and watch this free workshop now. Just click the link on screen or in the description below to get your own personal access. It's completely free and seriously, you're going to love it. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. We make tutorials and tips just like this one every week on this channel. We'd love to help you grow. So that's going to be it from me. This has been Dylan Pines with Musician on a Mission. And remember, create regardless.